The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty trading post, and Katherine Kimball stepped down onto the cracked earth of Scottsbluff, Nebraska, with nothing but a worn carpetbag, a tarnished silver locket around her neck, and a stubborn flame of hope that refused to die despite everything life had thrown at her. It was late August 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small town that had grown up around the trading routes heading west. Katherine shielded her eyes against the glare, studying the rough buildings that lined the main street. This was supposed to be where her aunt lived, the aunt who had written 3 years ago offering Katherine a place to stay if she ever needed it. That letter had been Katherine's lifeline during the darkest days after her parents died of fever back in St. Louis, after the bank took their house, after everything she had known crumbled to dust. She was 22 years old, and she felt ancient. The stagecoach driver tossed down her bag without ceremony and climbed back up to his seat. "You sure this is where you want to be, miss?" he asked, not unkindly. "Ain't much here for a lady on her own." Katherine straightened her shoulders under her faded blue traveling dress. "I am certain, thank you." The stage rolled away in a cloud of dust, and Katherine stood alone on the wooden sidewalk, carpetbag at her feet, one hand clasped around the locket at her throat. Inside was a tiny photograph of her parents, taken when they were young and the world still held promise. She had sold everything else: her mother's wedding ring, her father's watch, all the furniture, but she could not part with this last remnant of the life she had lost. The trading post door stood open, and Katherine picked up her bag and walked inside. The interior was dim and cooler, smelling of leather and tobacco and coffee. A heavy-set man with a thick beard stood behind the counter, weighing out flour for a weathered woman in a calico dress. Katherine waited until they finished their transaction, then approached. "Excuse me, sir. I am looking for Mrs. Margaret Kimball. I was told she lived in Scottsbluff." The man's expression shifted, becoming uncomfortable. "Margaret Kimball, you say?" "Yes, she is my aunt." He scratched at his beard, not meeting her eyes. "I am real sorry to tell you this, miss, but Mrs. Kimball passed on last winter. Pneumonia took her." The world tilted slightly. Katherine gripped the edge of the counter. "I see. You came all this way from back east, from St. Louis." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I did not know. Had no family here that I knew of." Kept to herself mostly. "I am real sorry." Katherine nodded mechanically. She could feel the man's pity washing over her, and it was somehow worse than his news. "Thank you for telling me." She turned and walked back out into the brutal sunshine, her mind strangely blank. The stagecoach was long gone. She had $23 sewn into the lining of her bag, the last of everything she owned. The next stage east would not come through for another week, and the fare would take most of what she had left. A group of cowboys rode past, their horses kicking up dust that coated her dress and caught in her throat. One of them called something to her, and the others laughed, but Katherine barely registered it. She walked without direction, past the general store, past a saloon already full of afternoon drinkers, past a modest white church with a narrow steeple. At the edge of town, she found herself in front of a small boarding house with a hand-painted sign that read "Rooms Available." Mrs. P. Henderson, proprietress. Katherine stared at it for a long moment, calculating in her head. A week's room and board, plus the stagecoach fare, would leave her with perhaps $5 when she returned to St. Louis. $5 and no plan and no prospects. The locket felt heavy against her chest. "You look lost." Katherine turned. A man stood a few feet away, tall and lean in dusty work clothes and a battered hat that shaded his face from the sun. He had the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors, and his eyes were a surprising shade of blue-green that reminded Katherine of the river back home in spring. "I am not lost," she said automatically, though it was perhaps the greatest lie she had ever told. He pushed his hat back slightly, studying her with an expression that was more concerned than forward. "New in town, just arrived. Figured, most folks around here I know by sight." He gestured toward her bag. "Looking for the boarding house. I was considering it. Mrs. Henderson is fair. Keeps clean rooms and serves decent meals. But if you are looking for work, you might want to check with the Reverend first. His wife takes on help sometimes, and the room comes with it." Katherine looked at him more carefully. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with an honest face that showed traces of both kindness and hardship. There was nothing threatening in his manner, nothing that set her on edge the way some men did. "Thank you for the suggestion," she said. "That is thoughtful," he shrugged. "Just trying to help. Name's Thomas Quinn, but most folks call me Tom. Katherine Kimball." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that would have been formal if his hands had not been calloused and scarred from work. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Kimball. You have family in Scottsbluff." The question was casual, but Katherine felt the weight of the answer. "I thought I did. I was mistaken." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding that suggested he knew something about being alone in the world. "I am sorry to hear that. Thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "The Reverend you mentioned, where might I find him?" "Church is just back the way you came. White building with the steeple. Reverend Marcus and his wife live in the house just behind it." Tom paused, then added, "If you want, I could walk you back that way. Town's safe enough, but you should know where things are." Katherine knew she should be wary of strange men offering assistance, but there was something genuine in Tom Quinn's manner that made her trust her instincts. Besides, she was too tired and heartsick to maintain proper caution. "That would be kind of you." They walked back through town together, Tom shortening his long stride to match hers. He pointed out the various businesses, the doctor's office, the telegraph station, the livery stable where he apparently worked. "You are a stable hand?" Katherine asked. "Mostly I work the ranches roundabout. Breaking horses, moving cattle, whatever needs doing. I pick up work at the livery when things are slow." He glanced at her. "Not much, but it is honest." There was a defensive note in his voice, and Katherine realized he thought she might be judging him. "Honest work is nothing to apologize for," she said quietly. "It is more than many people can claim." They reached the church, and Tom led her around to the small house behind it. The yard was tidy, with a vegetable garden along one side and chickens pecking in the dirt. Tom knocked on the door, and after a moment, a plump woman with graying hair and a warm smile opened it. "Tom Quinn, as I live and breathe," she said. "What brings you by?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Marcus. This here is Miss Katherine Kimball. She just arrived in town and is looking for work. I thought you might could use some help." Mrs. Marcus looked Katherine over with sharp but not unkind eyes. "Come inside, dear. Tom, you are welcome too." "No, madam, I should get back to the livery. Just wanted to make sure Miss Kimball found her way." He tipped his hat to Katherine. "Good luck to you." "Thank you, Mr. Quinn, truly." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Just Tom is fine." Then he was gone, striding away with that easy, long-legged gait, and Mrs. Marcus was ushering Katherine inside to a kitchen that smelled of bread and herbs. Over tea and fresh biscuits, Katherine told her story, or at least the parts that mattered. The fever that took her parents, the debts, the aunt who had offered sanctuary but died before Katherine could reach her. She did not mention the landlord who had tried to corner her in the hallway of her boarding house in St. Louis, or the friend who had suggested Katherine might make good money in one of the dance halls. She did not mention how close she had come to accepting, how desperately she had needed to escape. Mrs. Marcus listened with the patient attention of someone who had heard many hard stories and learned not to judge. When Katherine finished, the older woman poured more tea and sat back. "My husband and I run a small school here," she said. "Just reading and writing and arithmetic for the children whose families have settled nearby. I also take in sewing and mending. My eyes are not what they were, and my fingers get stiff. I could use someone with a steady hand and a good heart. The pay would not be much, but room and board are included, and it is respectable work." Katherine felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "I would be grateful," she said, and was embarrassed to feel tears prick at her eyes. "So very grateful." Mrs. Marcus reached across the table and patted her hand. "We all need help sometimes, child. No shame in it. Now finish your tea and I will show you your room. You look like you could use a good rest." The room was small and simple, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a cracked basin, and a window that looked out over the vegetable garden. To Katherine, who had spent the last 3 months sleeping on a lumpy mattress in a room she shared with 2 other women, it looked like a palace. She set her carpetbag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, pressing her hand to her mouth to stifle the sob that wanted to escape. She had been so afraid, so utterly terrified that she would end up with nowhere to go and no choices left. And now, through sheer chance and the kindness of a stranger, she had been given a lifeline. Tom Quinn. She would have to thank him properly when she saw him again. The next morning, Katherine woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. She dressed in her other dress, a simple gray cotton that showed the careful mending at the cuffs and hem, and went downstairs. Mrs. Marcus was already up, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Katherine admitted. "What would you like me to do?" Mrs. Marcus smiled. "Eager to start, are you? Well, first have some breakfast. Then I have a basket of mending that needs attention. After that, if you feel up to it, you could help me prepare lessons for tomorrow. We have 15 students ranging from 5 years old to 12, and keeping them all engaged is a bit like herding cats." Katherine found herself smiling back. "I will do my best." The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Katherine mended and sewed in the mornings, helped teach the children in the afternoons, and assisted Mrs. Marcus with cooking and household chores in the evenings. The work was constant but not overwhelming, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Katherine felt useful rather than desperate. The children were a revelation. Some were the sons and daughters of ranchers and farmers, others belonged to the shopkeepers in town. They were rowdy and curious and occasionally exasperating, but they responded to Katherine's gentle patience. She found she had a knack for explaining things in ways that made sense to young minds, and Mrs. Marcus praised her natural teaching ability. A week after her arrival, Katherine was walking back from the general store with supplies for the school when she saw Tom Quinn outside the livery stable, working with a young horse. The animal was skittish, dancing sideways and tossing its head, but Tom's movements were calm and measured. He spoke to the horse in a low, steady voice, and gradually the animal settled. Katherine found herself pausing to watch. There was something almost graceful in the way Tom moved, a patience and understanding in how he handled the frightened creature. He never raised his voice or made sudden movements, just kept up that quiet stream of words until the horse finally let him stroke its neck. Tom looked up and saw her standing there. He smiled and waved, then said something to the horse and walked over, wiping his hands on his pants. "Miss Kimball, how are you settling in?" Very well, thanks to you, Katherine said. Mrs. Marcus is wonderful and the work suits me. I never properly thanked you for your help that first day. Tom shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. Was not much, just pointed you in the right direction. It was more than that. You saw someone who needed help and you took the time to provide it. Not everyone would have done so. He met her eyes, and Katherine saw something flicker in that blue-green gaze, something warm and interested. I am glad it worked out. You seem happier than when you stepped off that stage. I am, Katherine said honestly. I was in a very dark place and now I have hope again. Hope is important, Tom said quietly. Sometimes it is all we have got. There was a weight to his words that suggested personal experience. Katherine wanted to ask, but it seemed too forward for such a new acquaintance. Instead, she said, Mrs. Marcus mentioned there is a social at the church next Saturday, a sort of welcome gathering for new families in the area. Will you be there? Might be, Tom said, his tone carefully casual. Do not usually go in for that sort of thing, but maybe this time. Katherine felt herself smile. I hope you will. I do not know many people yet, and it would be nice to see a friendly face. Then I will make sure to be there, Tom said, and the warmth in his voice made something flutter in Katherine's chest. She had not thought about men or romance or any of that since her world fell apart. Survival had pushed everything else aside. But standing there in the Nebraska sunshine, talking to this kind, steady man with the gentle hands and honest eyes, Katherine felt something stir to life inside her. Not the desperate need that had characterized so much of her recent existence, but something softer and more hopeful. The social was held in the church hall on a warm Saturday evening. Long tables had been set up and covered with food brought by the various families, and lanterns hung from the rafters cast a golden glow over everything. Katherine had helped Mrs. Marcus prepare a large pot of stew and several loaves of fresh bread, and she stood near the serving table feeling shy and out of place. She wore her blue dress, freshly cleaned and pressed, and she had taken extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a style her mother had taught her years ago. The locket gleamed at her throat, her one piece of real jewelry, her only connection to the life she had lost. People arrived in clusters, families and couples and groups of cowboys from the nearby ranches. Katherine smiled and nodded as Mrs. Marcus introduced her around, but the names and faces blurred together. She was scanning the crowd, looking for one person in particular, when a voice spoke near her ear. You look real pretty tonight, Miss Kimball. She turned to find Tom Quinn standing beside her, and her heart gave a little jump. He had cleaned up for the occasion, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing what were clearly his best clothes, a clean shirt and vest and pants without dust or stains. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. Thank you, Katherine said, feeling herself blush. You look very nice as well. Do not clean up too often, Tom admitted. Feel a bit like a trussed turkey. Katherine laughed, and some of her nervousness faded. I know what you mean. I keep worrying I will spill something on my dress. Then we will just have to be careful, Tom said. Have you eaten yet? They filled plates and found seats at one of the long tables, joining a group that included the doctor and his wife, a young couple who ran the general store, and several ranch hands Tom knew from his work. The conversation flowed around them, talk of weather and cattle prices and the new railroad spur that might be coming through next year. Katherine found herself relaxing, drawn into the easy camaraderie. These were hardworking people who understood struggle and valued community. No one asked intrusive questions about her past or made her feel like an outsider. When Tom refilled her glass of lemonade or passed her the basket of bread without her having to ask, it felt natural rather than presumptuous. After the meal, someone brought out a fiddle and another a banjo, and music filled the hall. Couples moved to dance, and Tom stood and offered Katherine his hand. "I am not much of a dancer," he warned, "but if you are willing to risk your toes, I would be honored." Katherine placed her hand in his, feeling the calloused warmth of his palm against hers. "I think I can manage." He was right that he was not a polished dancer, but he moved with the same steady grace he showed with the horses, guiding her through the simple steps of the reel. Katherine found herself laughing as they turned and stepped, caught up in the music and the moment. When Tom smiled down at her, his whole face lit with uncomplicated joy. She felt her heart turn over. They danced 3 more dances, and then Tom walked her outside for some air. The night was clear and cool, the sky brilliant with stars that seemed close enough to touch. They stood in the churchyard, the sounds of music and laughter drifting through the open doors behind them. "Thank you for tonight," Katherine said softly. "I have not felt this happy in a very long time." Tom turned to look at her, his expression serious in the starlight. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That first day when you arrived in town, you said you had thought you had family here. What happened, if you do not mind me asking?" Katherine told him about her aunt, about the letter that had been her hope for so long, about arriving to find that hope had died last winter. She told him about her parents and the fever and losing everything she had known. The words came easier than they had with Mrs. Marcus, perhaps because Tom stood there in the darkness listening with such complete attention, or perhaps because something in his presence made her feel safe enough to be vulnerable. When she finished, Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I lost my parents too. Different way, but the feeling is probably similar. My pa drank himself to death when I was 17, and my ma just sort of gave up after that, died within the year. I have been on my own since then, working where I could, moving around." "I am so sorry," Katherine said, and meant it deeply. "It is a terrible thing to be alone." "It is," Tom agreed, "but maybe we do not have to be. Alone, I mean." He said it carefully, watching her face, and Katherine understood what he was offering. Not a promise or a proposal, not yet, but the possibility of connection. The chance to be something more than 2 people adrift in a hard world. "Maybe we do not," Katherine said, and when Tom reached for her hand, she let him take it. They stood there in the starlight, hands linked, and for the first time since her parents died, Katherine felt like she might have a future worth living. The weeks that followed were among the happiest Katherine had ever known. Tom began finding excuses to stop by the church house, bringing fresh eggs from a rancher who owed him a favor, offering to repair a loose board on the schoolhouse steps, asking if Mrs. Marcus needed any heavy lifting done. The older woman watched this courtship with twinkling eyes and a knowing smile, but she never said anything to make Katherine self-conscious. Tom and Katherine took walks together in the evenings after she finished her work, strolling through the dusty streets of Scottsbluff or following the creek that ran along the edge of town. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their childhoods, discussing books Katherine had read and dreams Tom had for owning his own land someday. They discovered a shared love of early mornings, a preference for coffee over tea, and a tendency to find humor in small absurdities. It was on one of these walks, about a month after they met, that Tom finally kissed her. They had stopped by the creek to watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Tom had been unusually quiet. Finally, he turned to her and said, "Katherine, I know we have not known each other long, but I need you to know how I feel." Her heart was pounding. "Yes. I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "Maybe have been since the day I saw you standing outside that boarding house looking lost and determined all at once. I know I do not have much to offer. I have got $40 saved, a good saddle, and a reputation for honest work. But if you are willing, I would like to try to build something with you. A life, I mean. A real life." Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and I do not need you to have much. I have got nothing but a locket and hope." Tom reached out and gently touched the silver locket at her throat, then cupped her face in his hands. "A locket and hope," he said softly. "That is enough to start forever." Then he kissed her, gentle and sweet, and Katherine felt the last of her fear and grief begin to heal. They were married 6 weeks later in the little white church, with Mrs. Marcus standing up as Katherine's attendant, and a ranch hand named Sam serving as Tom's witness. Katherine wore her blue dress with white ribbons. Mrs. Marcus had given her woven through her hair, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers Tom had picked that morning. She had never felt more beautiful. Tom wore his best clothes, the same ones from the social, and when he spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to love you and care for you all the days of my life," he said. "To be your partner and your friend, to work hard and build a good life for us. You will never be alone again, Katherine. Never." Katherine's voice shook slightly when she said her own vows, but the words came from the deepest part of her heart. "I promise to love you and stand beside you through whatever comes, to be your wife and your home. We will build a life together, Tom, and it will be good." When Reverend Marcus pronounced them husband and wife, Tom kissed her with such tender joy that Katherine felt her heart might burst. They had no money for a proper honeymoon or even a wedding trip, but Tom had arranged with one of the ranchers for the use of a small line shack about 5 miles out of town. It was rustic and simple, just one room with a stone fireplace and a narrow bed, but to Katherine, it might as well have been a palace. Tom had ridden out earlier in the week to clean it and stock it with supplies, and he had picked more wildflowers and put them in a jar on the rough wooden table. When Katherine saw them, she started to cry, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of this man she had married. "Hey now," Tom said, looking alarmed. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Katherine said, laughing through her tears. "Everything is right, so perfectly, wonderfully right." They spent 3 days in that little shack, learning each other in ways both physical and emotional. Tom was gentle and patient, understanding that Katherine was nervous. He took his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness that made Katherine fall even more deeply in love. In the quiet moments between, they talked about their plans. Tom had been saving money for years, and now with both of them working, they could save even faster. His dream was to have a small ranch of his own, nothing fancy, just enough land to run some cattle and maybe breed horses. Katherine loved the idea, imagining a house they would build together, a place that would be truly theirs. "We will have children," Tom said, his hand resting on her stomach with gentle possessiveness. "A whole houseful if we are blessed, and we will give them the kind of home we both wished we had." "Yes," Katherine said, her own hand covering his. "We will." When they returned to Scottsbluff, Mrs. Marcus had arranged for them to stay in a small room she had prepared above the schoolhouse. It was not much, but it was private and rent-free in exchange for Katherine continuing to help with the school and sewing. Tom went back to his work at the ranches and livery, and they settled into married life with the ease of two people who fit together naturally. Winter came, and with it the harsh Nebraska cold. Katherine learned to bank the fire to keep their small room warm through the night, to make hearty stews and soups that stretched ingredients, to mend clothes by lamplight, while Tom read aloud from the newspaper or books borrowed from the Reverend's collection. They were poor but content, saving every penny they could spare toward their dream. In February, Katherine realized she was with child. She told Tom on a Sunday morning, and he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, his face transformed with joy. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "You and me, Katherine, we are going to have a baby." She cupped his face in her hands. "We are. Are you ready?" "I have been ready since the moment I met you," Tom said, and kissed her soundly. The pregnancy progressed well through the spring. Katherine continued teaching the younger children, while Mrs. Marcus took on more of the older students' lessons. Tom became almost comically protective, insisting Katherine rest more and not lift anything heavy, bringing her little treats when he could afford them, rubbing her feet when they ached at the end of the day. In late April, a rancher named Mr. Peterson approached Tom with an offer. He was getting older and wanted to sell off a portion of his land, about 80 acres with a creek running through it and good grazing. The price was fair, more than fair actually, because Peterson had known Tom for years and respected his work ethic. With what they had saved and a loan Peterson was willing to provide with generous terms, they could manage it. Tom came home that evening practically vibrating with excitement and nerves. "It is good land, Katherine. Real good. We could run maybe 30 head to start, and I could keep taking work on other ranches until we build up the herd. There is even an old soddy on the property that we could fix up and live in until we can afford to build proper." Katherine felt her own excitement rising. "Show me." They rode out the next day, Katherine seated carefully in front of Tom on his horse, his arms secure around her growing belly. The land was beautiful in the way of the open prairie, rolling grassland with scattered stands of cottonwoods, the creek running clear and cold through a shallow valley. The soddy was small and weathered but structurally sound, and Katherine could already see how they could make it into a real home. "What do you think?" Tom asked anxiously. "Is it too soon? Should we wait until after the baby comes?" Katherine turned to him, taking both his hands. "I think it is perfect. I think we should do it." Tom let out a whoop of joy that startled a hawk from a nearby tree, then gathered Katherine into his arms as carefully as if she were made of glass. "We are going to have our own place," he said into her hair. "Our own land, our own home. I am going to work so hard, Katherine. I am going to make this the best ranch in Nebraska." "I know you will," Katherine said. "We will do it together." They signed the papers the following week, and suddenly they were landowners. It felt surreal and thrilling and terrifying all at once. Tom threw himself into the work with fierce determination, spending dawn to dusk riding the property, mending fences, reinforcing the soddy, hauling away years of accumulated debris. Katherine helped when she could, cleaning the interior of the soddy, scrubbing the floors and walls, making curtains from flour sacks Mrs. Marcus helped her bleach and dye. The soddy was just one room, dark and earthy smelling, but Katherine made it home. She hung the curtains, arranged their few pieces of furniture, put the wildflower jar on the windowsill. She hung her mother's quilt on the wall to brighten the space, and placed the photograph from her locket in a small frame Tom had made from scrap wood. When they finally moved in at the end of May, Katherine stood in the doorway and felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. "What are you thinking?" Tom asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist, his hands resting on her belly where their child grew. "I am thinking about that day I arrived in Scottsbluff," Katherine said. "I had nothing but a locket and hope, and I thought that was almost nothing, but it was enough. It was enough to start all of this." Tom turned her gently to face him. "You gave me something to hope for too. I was just drifting before I met you, working but not really living. You made me want to build something, to be something more than just a hired hand." "We made each other more," Katherine said, stretching up to kiss him. We made each other whole. Their son was born on a sweltering night in late August, exactly 1 year after Katherine had arrived in Scottsbluff. Mrs. Marcus came out to the soddy to attend the birth, along with the doctor from town. It was a long and difficult labor, and there were moments when Katherine thought she could not endure another pain. But Tom never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, murmured encouragement even when she snapped at him to be quiet. When their baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Katherine burst into tears of exhaustion and overwhelming love. Tom cut the cord with shaking hands, and when the doctor placed the baby on Katherine's chest, he sat beside them with wonder written all over his face. "He is perfect," Tom whispered, touching one tiny fist with a careful finger. "Katherine, we have a son." They named him Jacob Thomas Quinn, and he became the center of their universe. Tom would come in from a long day working the ranch and immediately reach for the baby, rocking him and talking to him about the cattle and the horses and everything they would do together when Jacob was older. Katherine nursed him and sang lullabies her mother had sung to her, feeling the circle of life continuing, feeling connected to her parents in a way she had not since they died. Life was hard but good. They lived simply, counting every penny, but they were building something real. Tom's reputation for honest work brought opportunities, and he began buying cattle a few head at a time. By the time Jacob was 6 months old, they had 40 head, and Tom was talking about building a small barn before the next winter. Katherine took in sewing to bring in extra money, and she also helped neighboring ranch wives when they needed an extra pair of hands during busy seasons. The community around Scottsbluff was growing, and the Quinns became a respected part of it. People knew them as hardworking, honest, and willing to help their neighbors in times of need. When Jacob was a year old, they had saved enough to start building a proper house. It would be small, just 3 rooms to start, but it would have real wood walls and a shingled roof and windows with glass panes. Tom did most of the work himself with help from neighbors who came out for a barn raising that turned into a house raising. Katherine cooked for the workers and watched with pride as walls went up and her dream took solid shape. They moved into the new house in November of 1880, and Katherine cried again, but these were tears of pure joy. She had a real home for the first time since her parents died. She had a husband who loved her, a healthy son, a place that belonged to them. She thought about that frightened girl who had stepped off the stagecoach with nothing, and she could hardly believe this was the same life. Tom seemed to read her thoughts. As they stood in their new parlor, Jacob asleep in his arms, Tom said, "We have come a long way." "We have," Katherine agreed, leaning against his side, "and we will go further still." "Together," Tom said firmly, "always together." The years unfolded with the rhythms of ranch life. There were harsh winters when they worried about the cattle and rationed their supplies carefully. There were dry summers when the creek ran low and the grass turned brown. There were lost calves and broken fences and equipment that needed repair. But there were also good years. Years when the cattle brought fine prices at market. Years when the rain came at the right time and the grass grew thick and green. Jacob grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly, helping with small tasks around the ranch. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue-green eyes, and a sunny temperament that made everyone who met him smile. When Jacob was 3, Katherine became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was easier in some ways, she was older now and had a toddler to chase after. Tom insisted she rest more, and he took on extra help during busy seasons so he could be around the house more. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1883, an easier birth than Jacob's had been. They named her Emma Margaret Quinn, the middle name after Catherine's aunt, whose letter had started this entire journey. Emma was smaller and quieter than Jacob had been, with Tom's lighter hair and Catherine's gray eyes, and she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she arrived. With 2 children, the house that had seemed spacious suddenly felt smaller, but they made it work. Tom began planning an addition, saving materials as he could afford them. Katherine organized their space with ruthless efficiency, making sure every inch served a purpose. They had little in the way of luxuries, but they had each other and a home filled with love and laughter. The ranch continued to grow slowly but steadily. By 1885, they had 60 head of cattle, and Tom had begun breeding horses like he had always dreamed. He had an eye for good bloodlines and a way with difficult animals, and people began coming to him specifically to buy horses. It brought in additional income that allowed them to expand the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Katherine continued her sewing and had become known for her skilled handiwork. She made wedding dresses for young brides, quilts for new babies, and fine shirts for special occasions. She also taught reading to the ranch children in the area a few afternoons a week, gathering them in her parlor for lessons. She charged a small fee for those who could afford it, and taught for free those who could not, remembering what it had meant to be desperate and grateful for any opportunity. Jacob started helping his father with real work by the time he was 7, learning to rope and ride and handle the cattle. He was a natural, fearless but not reckless, and Tom glowed with pride watching him. Emma, at 4, was more interested in her mother's work, sitting at Catherine's feet while she sewed and learning her letters far earlier than her brother had. Life was not without its sorrows. They lost a calf to wolves one winter, and Tom spent weeks hunting the pack to protect the rest of the herd. Katherine miscarried a baby when Emma was 5, and they grieved together for the child who would never be. There were illnesses and injuries, near misses and hard times. But they weathered each storm together, their bond growing stronger through adversity. In the summer of 1886, 8 years after they met, Tom came in from the range one evening with a thoughtful expression. Katherine was preparing supper while Emma set the table and Jacob washed up after a day helping his father. "I was thinking," Tom said, leaning against the doorway and watching his family with visible contentment. "We should go into town this Saturday, all of us, have a proper family outing." Katherine looked up from the stove, smiling. "Any particular reason?" "Been 8 years since we married," Tom said. "Seems like that is worth celebrating." Katherine put down her spoon and crossed to him, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. 8 years, can you believe it?" "Some days it feels like forever," Tom said, pulling her close. "Other days it feels like yesterday you stepped off that stage." "I was so scared," Katherine remembered, "so lost. And I was just a cowboy with nothing to offer but a willingness to try." Katherine pulled back to look at him seriously. "You were everything I needed. You still are." Saturday came, and they loaded the children into the wagon Tom had bought 2 years earlier and headed into Scottsbluff. The town had grown considerably, with new buildings and even a proper hotel. They stopped first to visit Mrs. Marcus, who was older and grayer but still spry, still teaching and taking in sewing with Katherine's help. "Look at you all," Mrs. Marcus said, hugging each of them in turn. "Such a beautiful family." "Katherine, I knew that first day you had steel in you, but I never imagined all this." "I could not have done it without you," Katherine said warmly. "You saved me that day." "Nonsense," Mrs. Marcus said briskly. "You saved yourself." "I just pointed you in the right direction," same as young Tom here. They had lunch at the new restaurant, a luxury that made the children's eyes widen. Jacob ordered steak like his father, trying to sit up tall and grown, while Emma got chicken and spent the whole meal chattering about everything she saw. After lunch, Tom took them to the general store and let each child pick out one item. Jacob chose a pocket knife, and Emma selected a rag doll with yellow yarn hair. As the sun began to set, they drove out to the creek where Tom had first kissed Katherine. The children played in the shallow water while Tom and Katherine sat on the bank, watching. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Katherine asked softly. Tom slipped his arm around her waist. "I said a locket and hope was enough to start forever." "You were right," Katherine said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It was enough, more than enough." "We have built a good life," Tom said, and there was satisfaction in his voice, pride without arrogance. "A real legacy for our children." "We have," Katherine agreed. She reached up to touch the locket at her throat, which she still wore every day. The silver was more tarnished now, the chain showing wear, but it remained precious. "My parents would be proud, I think, to see how far I have come." "They would," Tom assured her. "Same as my folks would be proud of me for finding you, for building all this." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors it had been that evening 8 years ago. Jacob called out something about a frog he had found, and Emma squealed with delighted disgust. Their voices carried across the water, full of joy and innocence. "We should have another," Katherine said suddenly. Tom looked at her in surprise. "Another child, why not? We have the room now and we are doing well. I am only 30 years old. We have time." A slow smile spread across Tom's face. "I like the idea of a full house, more children running around, more noise and laughter." "It will be more work," Katherine warned. "Good work, though," Tom said. "The best kind." Their third child, a son they named Henry, was born in the spring of 1887. The birth was harder than the previous two, and the doctor warned that Katherine should probably not have more children. She was disappointed but practical, and she poured all her love into the 3 they had been blessed with. Henry was a cheerful baby who grew into a rambunctious toddler, always into everything, keeping Katherine on her toes. Jacob, at 10, was already a real help on the ranch, working alongside his father with growing competence. Emma, at 7, was studious and creative, spending hours reading books Katherine borrowed for her and drawing pictures of the ranch and the animals. The ranch continued to prosper. They had expanded to over 100 head of cattle, and Tom's horse breeding operation had become well known throughout the territory. They hired a young man named David to help with the work, giving him room and board in a small cabin Tom built near the barn. David was hardworking and respectful, and he fit into their operation seamlessly. Katherine's sewing business had grown as well. She had hired 2 young women from town to help with the simpler work, and she focused on the more intricate pieces. She had made enough money to buy a proper sewing machine, a marvel of modern technology that cut her work time in half. Between her income and Tom's, they were able to save a substantial amount, planning for their children's futures. Life had given Katherine more than she had ever dreamed possible that desperate day she arrived in Scottsbluff. She had a husband who loved her deeply, 3 healthy children, a successful business, and a beautiful home on land they owned outright. She had friends and respect and a place in the community. She had everything she had lost and more, but the moment that crystallized it all, that brought everything full circle, came in the fall of 1890. Jacob was 13 now, tall and lanky, and looking more like his father every day. Emma was 10, serious and sweet, helping with Henry, who was 3 and a handful. Katherine was 34, Tom was 39, and they had been married for 12 years. A young woman arrived in Scottsbluff on the afternoon stage, alone and frightened, clutching a carpetbag and looking lost. Katherine was in town picking up supplies when she saw her, and something about the woman's expression, the particular combination of fear and determination, struck a chord deep in Katherine's memory. She approached slowly. "Excuse me, are you all right? You look like you might need help." The young woman turned, and Katherine saw tears in her eyes. "I am looking for my uncle. I was told he lived here, but I just found out he died 6 months ago. I have nowhere to go." The story poured out, different details but the same essential shape as Katherine's own. A family lost, debts mounting, a desperate flight to the only hope available that turned out to be a dead end. Katherine listened with her whole heart, remembering exactly how this felt. "What is your name?" Katherine asked gently. "Lucy. Lucy Henderson." "Lucy, my name is Katherine Quinn. 12 years ago, I arrived on that same stage in almost exactly your situation. And someone helped me, someone who saw I needed a chance and gave me one." She paused, then said, "I own a successful sewing business and teach reading to children. I could use an assistant for both, someone quick to learn and willing to work hard. The pay is fair and includes room and board. Would you be interested?" Lucy's face transformed, hope breaking through the fear like sun through clouds. "You would do that, for a stranger?" "Someone did it for me," Katherine said simply. "Now I am doing it for you." She brought Lucy home to meet Tom, who took one look at Katherine's face and understood immediately. "We have room," he said without hesitation. "Always room for someone who needs a hand up." They gave Lucy the smallest bedroom, the one they had planned to eventually turn into a study. Katherine began training her in sewing and teaching, and Lucy proved to be bright and hardworking, eager to repay the kindness shown to her. She fit into their family naturally, and the children adored her. Watching Lucy begin to heal and hope again, Katherine felt the circle complete. She had been saved, and now she could save someone else. She had been given a chance, and now she could provide one. The girl with nothing but a locket and hope had become a woman who could offer others what she had been given. That night, lying in bed with Tom's arms around her, Katherine said, "Thank you." "For what?" Tom asked sleepily. "For seeing me that first day. For helping when you did not have to. For loving me and building this life with me. For everything." Tom tightened his arms around her. "You do not have to thank me for loving you, Katherine. That was the easiest thing I ever did. The moment I saw you, something in me just knew. Knew you were who I had been waiting for, who I was meant to find." "I felt it too," Katherine whispered. "Even through all the fear and grief, some part of me recognized you, recognized home." "This is home," Tom agreed. "Not the house or the land, though I am proud of what we have built." "You are my home, Katherine. You and our children. Wherever you are is where I belong." Katherine turned in his arms to kiss him, a kiss that held 12 years of love and partnership and shared struggles and triumphs. When they finally drew apart, she rested her forehead against his. "We did it," she said softly. "We took nothing and made everything." "We did," Tom agreed. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us, years to watch our children grow and have children of their own, years to keep building and growing and loving each other." "Forever," Katherine said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. A locket and hope was enough to start forever. "Forever," Tom confirmed and kissed her again. The years continued to unfold with the natural rhythm of a life well lived. Jacob grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over more of the ranch operations as Tom began to slow down with age. He married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, a practical young woman named Sarah who fit right into the Quinn family. They gave Katherine and Tom their first grandchildren, twin boys who were the absolute terror and joy of everyone who knew them. Emma pursued education with fierce determination, eventually becoming a teacher in Scottsbluff, following in Katherine's footsteps, but taking it further. She married a lawyer who had moved to town to open a practice, and they had 3 daughters who were all as serious and studious as their mother had been. Henry, the wild child, surprised everyone by developing a passion for horse breeding that surpassed even his father's. He expanded that part of the ranch operation significantly, developing a reputation for quality that stretched far beyond Nebraska. He married late, at 28, to a widow with a young son, and they had 2 more children together, creating a loud, chaotic, loving family. Lucy Henderson, the young woman Katherine had helped, eventually married David, the ranch hand Tom had hired years earlier. They saved enough to buy a small parcel of land adjoining the Quinn Ranch, and they built their own successful operation. They named their first daughter Katherine, after the woman who had given Lucy hope when she had nothing. Tom and Katherine grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated 25 years of marriage, then 30, then 35. Tom's dark hair went gray, then white, and his face became weathered with age and sun. Katherine's dark hair silvered gracefully, and her hands grew gnarled with arthritis from years of sewing, but she remained strong and capable. They moved into semi-retirement, letting Jacob run most of the ranch while they focused on their grandchildren and the community work that had always been important to them. Tom helped train young cowboys and passed on his knowledge of horses and cattle. Katherine continued teaching reading and sponsored several young women who needed help getting started, paying forward the kindness that had saved her life. On a warm evening in August 1903, 25 years to the day after Katherine had arrived in Scottsbluff, Tom and Katherine sat on the porch of their home watching the sun set. Their house had grown over the years, additions built as needed, until it was a sprawling, comfortable place that had sheltered not just their immediate family but countless others who needed a place to stay or a helping hand. Jacob and Sarah lived in a house they had built a quarter-mile away, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy. Emma visited often from town with her family. Henry and his wife lived in a cabin on the far side of the property, near the barns and corrals. Lucy and David's place was visible from the porch, smoke rising from their chimney. "Who would have thought," Katherine said softly, taking Tom's hand, "that it would all turn out like this?" Tom squeezed her fingers gently. His hands were spotted with age now, the knuckles swollen from years of hard work, but his grip was still steady. "I thought it. The moment I saw you, I thought there is a woman I could build a life with." "You were so confident," Katherine said, smiling at the memory. "I was terrified, but you were calm and sure." "Was not confident at all," Tom admitted. "I was scared to death you would not feel the same way, scared I would say the wrong thing or you would meet someone better, but I figured I had to try, had to take the chance." "I am so glad you did," Katherine said. "So very glad." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to orange to deep purple. In the distance, they could hear children laughing, probably some of their grandchildren playing before bedtime. A horse whinnied from the barn and cattle lowed in the far pasture. These were the sounds of home, of a life fully lived. "Katherine," Tom said eventually, his voice serious, "I need you to know something." She looked at him, noting the grave expression. "What is it?" "I am 70 years old now, and I know I do not have forever left. Neither of us do. But I want you to know that every single day with you has been a gift. Even the hard days, the days when we struggled and worried and wondered if we would make it. Those were still good days because we faced them together. Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes. Tom Quinn, you are getting sentimental in your old age. Maybe so, he said with a slight smile, but it is all true. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. You and the family we made and the life we built. I do not regret a single moment. Neither do I, Katherine said firmly. Not one moment. Well, maybe I regret that time you decided to break that mean stallion and broke your arm instead. Tom laughed, the sound still rich and warm despite his age. That was not my finest hour, he admitted, but you took such good care of me while it healed. Someone had to, Katherine said. You were a terrible patient. Still am, Tom said cheerfully. They sat together as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had shone down on them the night of their first kiss, the night Tom had set a locket, and hope was enough to start forever. Katherine reached up to touch the locket at her throat, which she still wore every day. The silver was heavily tarnished now, the engraving nearly worn smooth, but it remained her most precious possession besides her wedding ring. You ever think about that day? Katherine asked. The day I arrived. All the time, Tom said. I think about how scared you looked, trying so hard to be brave. How you stood there with your bag and your head up, ready to face whatever came. I think about how close I came to not stopping to talk to you, to just walking on past. How different everything would have been if I had made that choice. But you did not walk past, Katherine said. You stopped. You helped. You saw someone who needed kindness and you gave it. And you let me, Tom said. You could have been suspicious or sent me away. But you took a chance on a stranger, same as I took a chance on you. We were both brave that day, Katherine said. We were, Tom agreed. And we have been brave every day since in different ways. Brave enough to build a life, to raise children, to keep going when times were hard. Brave enough to love each other fully, knowing that someday we would lose each other. Katherine felt a tear slide down her cheek. I do not like thinking about that. Tom reached over and gently wiped away the tear. I do not either, but it is the truth of life, Katherine. All we can do is make sure that when that time comes, whenever it comes, we have no regrets, that we have loved fully and lived well and left something good behind. We have done all that, Katherine said, her voice thick with emotion. Our children and grandchildren, the ranch, the people we have helped, we have left a legacy of love and hard work and kindness. That is not nothing. That is everything, Tom said softly. Tom Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1905 at the age of 72. He had been slowing down for months, his strong body finally giving way to the accumulation of years and hard work. But he remained mentally sharp and loving until the end, spending his last days surrounded by his family, telling stories and offering advice and making sure everyone knew how much they were loved. Katherine grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had known this day would come eventually, and she drew strength from the knowledge that they had lived their lives fully, that they had wasted none of the time they had been given. At Tom's funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives he had touched, and Katherine listened to the tributes with pride and sorrow mingled together. She lived another 8 years, remaining active and engaged with her community and her family. She watched more grandchildren be born and even lived to meet 2 great-grandchildren. She continued her teaching and her sewing, slowing down gradually, but never stopping entirely. She told stories about Tom to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive and vibrant. When she began to fail in the winter of 1913, her children gathered around her. She was 85 years old, and she had lived to see the world change in ways she never could have imagined that day she stepped off the stagecoach in Scottsbluff. But some things remained constant: the value of hard work, the importance of kindness, the power of love, On her last evening, with all three of her children and several grandchildren gathered in her bedroom, Katherine asked Jacob to bring her jewelry box. From it, she took the old silver locket, the one she had worn nearly every day of her adult life. "Emma," she said, her voice weak but clear, "I want you to have this." Emma took the locket carefully, tears streaming down her face. "Mother, are you sure? This was grandmother's." "It was," Katherine confirmed. "And before that, it belonged to my grandmother. It has been passed down through the women of our family for generations. Now I am passing it to you, and someday you will pass it to one of your daughters." "What should I tell them?" Emma asked. "About the locket?" Katherine smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "Tell them it holds more than photographs. Tell them it holds hope. Tell them that once, a long time ago, a young woman had nothing but this locket and hope, and a cowboy told her that was enough to start forever. Tell them he was right." Emma clutched the locket to her heart. "I will tell them, I promise." Katherine looked around at her children, at the grandchildren who crowded into the room, at the life she and Tom had created together. "I have been so blessed," she said softly, "so very blessed. All of you, everything we built, it all came from a moment of kindness, from someone seeing me when I was lost and offering help. Never forget that. Never forget the power you have to change someone's life with simple kindness." "We will not forget," Jacob promised, his voice breaking. "We will carry it forward, Mama. Everything you and Papa taught us." Katherine closed her eyes, content. She could almost feel Tom's presence in the room, waiting for her as he had promised so long ago that they would never truly be apart. She thought about that frightened girl on the stagecoach, clutching a locket and a desperate hope. She thought about the kind cowboy who had stopped to help. She thought about the life they had built together, piece by piece, day by day, with love and work and unwavering commitment. A locket and hope had been enough. It had been more than enough. It had been everything. Katherine Quinn passed away peacefully that night, surrounded by the family that was her legacy and Tom's, the proof that love and hope and kindness could transform the world. Her children laid her to rest beside Tom in the cemetery overlooking Scottsbluff, and on her gravestone they inscribed the words that had defined her life. She had nothing but a locket and hope. It was enough to start forever. The Quinn Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passing from Jacob to his children and then to theirs. The house that Tom and Katherine built remained the heart of the operation, expanded and modernized but essentially unchanged. Family gathered there for holidays and celebrations, and the stories of Tom and Katherine were told and retold, becoming the foundation myth of the family, the reminder of where they came from and what they valued. Emma's daughter, who inherited the locket, passed it to her own daughter, and so it continued down through the years. Each woman who wore it learned the story of Katherine and Tom, of a locket and hope, and a love that built a legacy. The silver grew more tarnished, the chain was replaced several times, but the locket itself remained, a tangible connection to the past, and a symbol of the power of hope and love. In Scottsbluff, the Quinn name became synonymous with integrity and hard work and community service. The town grew and changed, from a small frontier settlement to a proper town to a modern city, but the values Tom and Katherine had embodied remained important. The descendants of the people they had helped remembered, and they passed down their own stories of Quinn kindness and generosity. The little white church where Tom and Katherine were married stood for over 100 years, eventually being replaced by a larger, more modern building. But a plaque was installed commemorating the couples who had been married there in the early days, and Tom and Katherine's names were among them, frozen in time as they had been that September day in 1878 when they promised forever to each other. The creek where Tom first kissed Katherine became a local landmark, known as Quinn's Creek, to several generations. Young couples went there to watch the sunset, unknowingly recreating a moment from long ago, connecting to a love story they might not even know the details of, but could feel in the very air and water. The soddy where they first lived together as a married couple eventually collapsed, returning to the earth it had been made from. But Jacob had carefully preserved several of the carved beams, and he incorporated them into the main house as a reminder of humble beginnings. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren touched those old beams and felt connected to ancestors they had never met but whose influence shaped their lives. The love story of Tom and Katherine became the kind of story families treasure, the kind that gets told around dinner tables and at reunions, embellished perhaps with time but essentially true. It became a touchstone, a reminder that love is real and powerful, that kindness matters, that hope is never foolish even when circumstances seem hopeless. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Tom had understood instinctively that day he helped a lost young woman find her way. That we all need each other, that a small act of kindness can change everything, that love is worth risking everything for, and that hope, no matter how fragile it seems, is powerful enough to build a forever. Katherine had arrived in Scottsbluff with nothing but a locket and hope, and Tom had seen that it was enough. Together, they had proven it, building a life and a family and a legacy that lasted long after they were gone. They had taken almost nothing and made everything. They had loved fully and lived well and left the world better than they found it. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for? What greater success could there be than a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through generations? What better legacy than children and grandchildren who carried forward values of kindness and hard work and hope? Tom and Katherine Quinn had started with almost nothing, but they ended with everything that truly mattered. Their story became more than just a personal history. It became a testament to the power of love, the importance of kindness, and the truth that hope, even in the darkest moments, is never wasted. It became proof that forever is not just a romantic notion, but a real possibility when two people commit to building it together, one day at a time, with love as their foundation and hope as their guide. And so the story that began with a frightened woman stepping off a stagecoach and a kind cowboy offering help became a legend, a love story for the ages, a reminder that the smallest moments can change everything, and that a locket and hope really can be enough to start forever.